The title is why I'm here, because of the guilt that has consumed me for all too long. I'm so sorry to the young woman I hurt all those years ago. You may read this and conclude, like I have, that I am a horrible, rotten person whose soul rotted and decomposed 70 years ago, never to return. Or you may read this and assure me that it wasn't my fault, that I was only following orders, and while that is true, every single one of us who went along with what Mr. Rosemont told us to do is responsible. I pray the girl, Bethany Carmichael, is still alive, and that she is flourishing, but I doubt it. You see, in those days we didn't know about psychological damage, at least not to the extent that we now do. Or maybe some people did, but I didn't. Who am I kidding? Here I am still making excuses nearly 70 years later. I didn't know the term gaslighting back then, but I knew what we did was wrong. I let myself believe that it was necessary, but it wasn't. If all of us could be trusted to keep the secret, we could have trusted the poor girl too. We didn't, though. We sent her out into the world, likely changed forever, alone. I don't know about my old colleagues. Many of them are likely dead. I know that Mr. Rosemont is. He's been dead for decades. After all, I myself am almost 90. I will be in February of 2023. I was only 19 at the time, but Mr. Rosemont was already in his 40s. No, he's been gone a long while. The doctor, William Scottley, is surely dead by now too. But there are others. Lionel Villafontaine and Louis Jones and Sherman Judd, all 4 years younger than I, poor things, at their first jobs ever. And Catherine and Angela Beck, the twins who are 1 year younger, they could still be alive. And the girl, Bethany, she would be an old woman like myself too if she's still around. She was around the boys' age, but God willing I hope she is. I apologize if this is difficult to read. My eyes and typing skills are not what they used to be. I'll start at the beginning, I suppose. It was New York City, 1952. I had finished a 2-year degree at the college back home in Atlanta and was in the big city for the first time. Back then, it wasn't so hard to move to New York, not the way it is now. I lived in a row house with 2 roommates, and I worked at the Monsignor, an upscale hotel that has long since been torn down, rebuilt, and renamed. I had only been in the city for 2 months and working at the hotel for less than 1 when it happened. Afterwards, I left the industry and never worked somewhere that I had to interact with customers ever again. I had always been an independent woman, a feminist, but after the incident, I married the first man who asked and became a stereotypical 1950s housewife. After my wedding in 1955, I never worked anywhere again. It was a sweltering day in July. I was a concierge of sorts, giving recommendations on where to eat, where shops were, etc. Just down the line from me were the twins, Catherine and Angela, front desk clerks, and a little ways across from us was the bellhop station, where Lionel, Louis, and Sherman stood and smoked cigarettes in between loading up customers' bags. The 2 women walked in close to 1 p.m. I remember because I had only recently gotten back from my lunch break. The girl, Bethany, we would learn, had recently turned 16, and she was there with her mother, Charlotte. Bethany looked nervous and tired, but she strode ahead of her mother, who looked even more tired. Her mother was also a ghostly pale. I remember it all like it was yesterday. "Hello," Bethany said politely. "My mother and I, we need a room. I don't know for how long. We are traveling home to London from Chicago, but my mother's not feeling well. I think she is exhausted from the travel, so we have decided to rest here for a few days." Angela and Catherine replied cordially and set them up with a room, and then Lionel and Louis escorted them up to it. As Lionel tells it, Bethany pulled him aside after he had unloaded their bags and asked him to summon the hotel doctor. Mother says it's only heat and exhaustion, but it seems worse to me. Lionel assured her that he would get Dr. Scottley right away, and he did. Lionel stayed with Bethany while Dr. Scottley examined Mrs. Carmichael. As Lionel told it, this is what happened next. This is not good," Dr. Scottley told Bethany. "Listen, rest will be good for her, but she needs a special medication. I should stay here with your mother, but I will call my brother-in-law, Armand. He is my wife's brother. Unfortunately, he only speaks Albanian, but he owns a taxicab. He will drive you to my house in the suburbs and relay a message to my wife, as she does not speak great English yet either. She will get the medication for you from my special medication cabinet, and then Armand will bring you back here. Can you do that for your mother?" Bethany said she would. Lionel began to offer to go to her place or ride along with her, but Dr. Scottley shook his head and told him that Mr. Rosemont, the owner and manager, had a very important job for he and Louis in Sherman, so he could not accompany Bethany. And so Dr. Scottley summoned his brother-in-law and Bethany left with him. Immediately after this, it started. Dr. Scottley all but ran out of the Carmichael's room, his feet flying over the gray carpet, his white coat streaming past the navy blue walls, leaving Mrs. Carmichael alone in the bed with the light pink bedding. He grabbed Lionel by the arm and stormed downstairs to the bell desk where he told Lionel, Louie, and Sherman to not move a muscle until he got back, and then he dashed to the front desk and told me, Catherine, and Angela the same thing. Then he scrubbed his hands and face at the basin beside the front counters, and then he flung open the door to Mr. Rosemont's office without knocking and slammed it behind him. He was only inside for a few minutes, which is unsettling looking back, how quickly they came to the conclusion that they did. When Dr. Scottley opened the door again, he called for me, Catherine, Angela, Lionel, Louie, and Sherman to join him and Mr. Rosemont in the office. Dr. Scottley's face was red and Mr. Rosemont was sweating, dabbing his bald head with an embroidered handkerchief. "We have a most unfortunate situation," Mr. Rosemont began, "and I need your full compliance. If you do not comply with what William and I are about to tell you, you will not only be terminated immediately, but I will seek legal action. You know that I like all of you, and I apologize that we are in this situation. But it's very serious. When that girl Bethany, Dr. Scottley corrected him. Yes, Bethany. When Bethany Carmichael gets back here, you are to tell her that you have never seen her or her mother before. She will likely ask for the key to her room, and you must tell her that she has never had a room here. We will be destroying all records of her and her mother checking in, and the room is being repainted and refurbished as we speak." "What?" That was Angela Beck speaking. "What on God's green earth are you speaking of? Why the devil would any of us do that? Why would you do that?" We all stared at Mr. Rosemont and Dr. Scottley in bewilderment, and they looked nervously at each other. Mr. Rosemont's mustache twitched. "It's better if they do not know," Dr. Scottley said matter-of-factly. Mr. Rosemont said nothing but kept twitching his mustache. "If you don't tell me what's going on, I refuse to comply." That was Catherine now, backing up her sister. "I don't care if you fire us or take legal action. I will not do such a thing without reason." Mr. Rosemont stayed silent a moment longer and then let out a long sigh. "Very well. I'll make a deal with the 6 of you then. If we tell you what is going on, you must follow all orders that we give you regarding the situation. But afterwards it will not be spoken of, and you and your employment will be safe here barring any gross misconduct. Is that more to your liking?" The annoyance was clear in his voice, but something else too. Something more akin to fear or pain. "Okay," Angela and Catherine said at the same time. It was clear that they could hear the pain or fear or whatever it was in his voice too. "Veronica?" Mr. Rosemont asked me. I hesitated. It sounded awful. But Mr. Rosemont was a good man. Dr. Scottley, though I didn't know him well, seemed like a good man too, and he was certainly well educated. There had to be a reason, so I nodded. Mr. Rosemont confirmed with the boys too, and then solemnly nodded at Dr. Scottley. "Right," the doctor began. "The next time I go to check on Mrs. Carmichael, she will surely be dead. It's a wonder she was even able to walk into the hotel. She was so close to death. She has..." He paused for a long time before finally saying, "Yersinia pestis." When no one said anything after this, Mr. Rosemont spoke up again. "Don't be deaf, William. You know as well as I that no layman knows what that means." Dr. Scottley wrung his hands, his face marked with distress. We did not know the next word that he said either, but we all recognized the following one. "Septicemic plague," Dr. Scottley said quietly. Luckily, her daughter left before we removed her shoes. One look at the legs and feet told me all that I needed to know. It can't get out. For the sake of the hotel and our business, yes, but also because of the international uproar it will cause. "The plague? As in the plague?" I asked him incredulously. "The Black Death that killed 1/3 of Europe?" "Yes." Dr. Scottley's voice grew more pained the more he spoke. "We should be okay," he added quickly. "I was the only one who was close to her, and the disease had progressed so much it's unlikely that she would have spread it to any of us at this point. But God knows how many people she has been around or how long she has been sick. They came from London last week, were in Chicago, and now are here. I think that if her daughter had it, she would be showing symptoms by now, but we can't be sure. It cannot get out that someone died of the plague in the heart of New York City, let alone in our hotel. We cannot send her body back to London either. This may seem selfish, but it's truly not just about us. This will cause a worldwide panic." "But the girl..." Catherine sounded as though she was on the verge of tears. "I know," Mr. Rosemont said. "It is not an easy decision, but there are only 2 people. We have to think about the greater good, the billions of people around the world who could be affected." None of us liked it, but we didn't disagree, at least not entirely. And on another level, we needed our jobs. We did not want to be responsible for Mr. Rosemount's beautiful hotel going under. We did not want to be on the streets. And so we agreed. Once we had, Mr. Rosemount and Dr. Scottley explained the plan. The boys would immediately get on ripping out the carpet, repainting the room, and changing out the furniture. Catherine and Angela would get rid of all records of the Carmichaels. Dr. Scottley and Mr. Rosemount would arrange for Mrs. Carmichael's body to be picked up and buried in a nearby cemetery. I didn't have to do anything, really, at least until Bethany got back. I sat at my desk as I watched Angela and Catherine frantically rip up documents behind the desk. I sat frozen, staring at the doors, waiting for Bethany to return. Dr. Scottley explained that his brother-in-law and his wife, who in fact did speak perfect English, knew that they were to stall Bethany. Armand would take her on the longest route possible to the Williams house in Woodbury, and the longest routes back. His wife would make her wait in the parlor as long as she possibly could while she put sugar pills into the bottle for her. I secretly hoped that she would not be back by 6 p.m. when my shift ended, but I knew that she likely would be. Mr. Rosemount wouldn't want to involve the next shift of people in this, so he and Dr. Scottley would likely make sure that it was all said and done before shift change. Sure enough, at 5:15 p.m., the French doors that opened onto the street flew open. Bethany ran up to the front desk. Hello, please, I need my room key. She was out of breath and almost yelling at Angela. Catherine had stepped away to go to the powder room. I'm sorry, Angela said in as flat a voice that she could muster. I was not the one who helped you. Perhaps you spoke to my twin, she offered. I don't know when she'll be back. Angela glanced nervously in the direction of the powder rooms, hoping Catherine would not appear. I don't have time to wait for her, Bethany insisted. Please just look me up in the guest book and give me my key. I must get this medicine back to my mother. Her voice broke and her eyes filled with tears. I watched from my desk as Angela took a deep breath. Yes, of course, ma'am. Let me just... Angela opened the guest book slowly. It's under Charlotte Carmichael, Bethany said pleadingly. I'm sorry, Angela said after a few moments. I'm really sorry, but I think you must have the wrong hotel. I absolutely do not have the wrong hotel. This is the Monsignor on First Avenue, is it not? It is, Angela said carefully. This is where we were staying. I know it was. You! She spun wildly towards the bell desk and waved Lionel and Louis over. The two of you brought our bags upstairs. You offered to accompany me to the suburbs. She pointed at Lionel pleadingly. I only just got on shift an hour ago, Louis lied, shrugging. Lionel said nothing. Bethany grabbed him by the shoulders. Please, she begged Lionel. Please, I'm not crazy. You helped us with our bags. You called the doctor for me and you stayed with me. You offered to come with me to his house. A pain had settled into Lionel's eyes that I doubt ever left them. I'm sorry, ma'am, but I don't know what you're talking about. Every word that he uttered sounded like he was speaking around a mouthful of broken glass. Bethany dropped her hands from his shoulders and her face grew pale. We bellhops are a dime a dozen, Louis said. I'm sure you just had the wrong hotel. Tears spilled over Bethany's cheeks then. Where's Dr. Scottley? I was in his house, she pleaded. Just now. His brother-in-law drove me to his home, his own home, and his wife gave me this medicine. She held up the bottle of pills and shook them. Well, Sherman said, we do have a doctor here named Dr. Scottley. Let me get him for you. Still crying, Bethany nodded. Yes, please get Dr. Scottley. He will remember me. When Dr. Scottley came out of Mr. Rosemount's office a moment later, he smiled at Bethany and asked how could he help her. Dr. Scottley, I went to your house with your brother-in-law like you said. I got the medicine. She held the bottle out to him. Please, she begged. Please, my mother needs her medicine. Oh dear, Dr. Scottley said. Oh darling, you must have heat stroke. Perhaps we can get you a room for you to rest? What? What are you talking about? I have a room. It's room 113. It's right down the hall. Bethany was becoming hysterical. You sent me to your home. I can tell you what your sofa looks like. Your wife served me a cola. I am not crazy, I tell you. I want to see my mother. She was in hysterics, and the more upset she got, the worse I felt watching the whole spectacle from my desk a few feet away. You, Bethany turned and addressed me. Don't you remember seeing my mother and I earlier? You do, don't you? No, ma'am, I stammered. I'm sorry, but no. I see lots of customers every day, so... But Bethany was already done with me. She had seen the frosted glass door behind me that said management in thick gold letters. Give me a manager, or the owner, someone, right now. Tears were still streaming down her face. I could only nod, and I turned to knock on Mr. Rosemount's door, but before I could, it opened. What is the ruckus out here? He bellowed in mock surprise. Sir, please, you must listen to me, Bethany yelled. She relayed her story in halting gasps. So you see, she said when she had told him everything, your staff is trying to convince me that I've never been here, but that is not true, and my mother is still here in room 113, in a double bed with light pink bedding that is sitting on gray carpet surrounded by navy blue walls. Would I be able to describe the inside of the room to you if I had never been inside? Mr. Rosemont looked at her curiously. Ma'am, I'm very sorry for the apparent confusion, but we do not have a room like you've just described. Our rooms only have queen-size beds, and the walls are yellow, not blue, and the carpet is beige, not gray. And pink bedding, how dreadful. No, we only use white. You're lying. You're all lying. Tears streamed down her face. Let me see it then. Let me see room 113 if it is not what I remember. I felt so awful for her then, thinking she had called their bluff. Mr. Rosemont shrugged and said, Very well then, and took one of the brass keys off the large ring behind the counter and escorted Bethany down the hall. But I could still hear them when they arrived at the room. No, I heard Bethany say. Her voice was less hysterical now, less choked by tears, more disbelieving. I'm sorry, Mr. Rosemont said again. We just have no record of you or your mother. I wish I could help you. This can't be. The walls, they were painted navy blue. This is yellow wallpaper. I could hear in her voice that Mr. Rosemont's mission had been accomplished. Bethany's will had been broken. At some point she threatened to call the police, but everyone stuck to their assignment and didn't budge, and in the end Bethany Carmichael did not call the police, because what could she tell them? She had begun to believe that she was crazy, because Dr. Scottley knew they would have to get rid of all of Bethany and her mother's belongings. He had ensured that Bethany took her smaller luggage bag with her in the cab, so she still had her essentials, including her passport and plane ticket. Mr. Rosemont offered again to get her a room, but she refused and stormed out of the hotel. She came back the next 2 days in a row. We don't know where she was staying, but the conversation was the same every time. On the 4th day, however, the conversation changed a bit, and for that I felt most guilty. Bethany Carmichael walked in, more calmly than she had on previous days. She approached the front desk and stood in between my desk and the main front desk where Catherine and Angela stood. You do remember me, don't you? Bethany asked us calmly. I did not know what to say. Yes, of course, Catherine said. You have come here every day for 4 days now, claiming that you had a room in our hotel, and each day we have assured you that you are mistaken. That's not what I mean, Bethany said. You remember me. This time it was not phrased as a question. When none of us spoke, she continued. I'm going home to London tonight. I was able to reach my father and my sister, so I'll be home with them tomorrow. That is good, Angela said. Yes, it is. They knew that my mother was with me. They know I'm not crazy. She was still speaking calmly. Ma'am, I assure you, we are not denying that your mother may have been with you here in this city, Catherine said. She just was not at this hotel. Bethany scoffed. Right. Well, I just came to give you a final chance. She turned towards me then. All of you. Her eyes bore into mine. You're sure there's nothing you'd like to tell me? I'm sure I was not able to hide my sadness, but I shook my head. There were tears in Bethany's eyes, but she gave us a resigned smile and then turned and approached the bell desk. She had a similar conversation with Lionel, Louis, and Sherman, paying special attention to Lionel, even pressing her hands against his at one point, but none of them faltered from their story, and then she left. I never saw her again. I wish I could say that the story has a happy ending, but I don't even know what became of Bethany. Her mother is still buried in the city in a small graveyard in front of an even smaller church. Her name is on the headstone along with the year of death. I guess Mr. Rosemont did that so that if her family ever searched the city for her, at least they would find that and maybe have one piece of the puzzle solved. I don't know if they ever did. I would like to believe that Charlotte Carmichael's family at least knows that she did in fact die in 1952, but it doesn't seem realistic. Travel was expensive in those days, and if the Carmichael family had lots of money, they would have sent investigators to our hotel, and they never did. It would have been expensive to fly back to New York from London just to search for her, and even if they did, would they think to check cemeteries, let alone a small, nondescript graveyard at a random tiny church? Almost surely not. Clearly, I know how to use the internet, so I could look her up, but I'm too afraid to. I don't want to know what became of the Carmichaels, because I know almost for certain that it was nothing good. I also don't know if this belongs here. It is more awful and sad than scary, I suppose. But it is the most horrifying thing that I have ever done, and I just wanted to tell someone, just once.